So there's this myth about innovation that it's somehow about these mad scientists toiling away in the basement or in their garage or wherever. And that in order for us to create invention, we have to isolate ourselves and we have to kind of close out, shut all out the rest of the world. And I think this is just a really old-fashioned idea of how innovation works. It's certainly not reflective of the way we innovate now. This is kind of a very old school way of doing it. And in some ways, it's really informed by the media. So you have all these movies and TV shows, and whenever they're dealing with a scientist or with a really cool breakthrough in science, they always feature an individual. And so that makes a lot of sense for cinematography because you're really trying to draw out a story and you're trying to draw out the relationships that people have with each other. But in the real world, in the actual world of innovation, it works quite differently. So when I'm working on an innovation project, one of the first things I do is start to think about how I can bring together teams of individuals who can work together in kind of a really time constrained event so that they can come up with ideas as individuals, but then as teams as well. And I think this can really be powerful for innovation because you put them in this kind of very narrow time space, so they have that kind of sense of pressure where they have to come up and they have to perform in a certain period, over a certain period of time. And in bringing those groups together, I can think as an act unto itself is a really important component of innovation. So it's really about problem solving in teams. It's really about bringing a challenge, bringing a kind of grand vision to the table and asking individuals in groups to work together to solve those problems. And I think what you get out of this is a really valuable contribution because you end up with a lot of different ideas around how to solve that problem. And if each of the teams are working independently, then you end up with really robust and solid solutions to some really, really challenging issues. Now, there's a lot of different terminology when we talk about these sorts of events. Sometimes they're called innovation camps, sometimes they're called hackathons, and they're called a whole bunch of different workshops and things like that, innovation workshops. And there's a lot of really great companies out there that can provide the services to facilitate these workshops and design these workshops. So what I want to get across in this in this idea is some real key components that you can think about when you're sort of approaching innovation maybe for the first time, or you're approaching an innovation process without a lot of prior knowledge. So the first step, the first key ingredient to innovation is diversity. So when you're putting together an event, say, and you want to bring in a whole bunch of people into that event space and you want to bring them into different teams so that they can produce an idea or a solution to a challenge, to a specific problem, you really want to make sure that your recruitment, the work that you do in trying to draw those individuals in, if they're volunteers, or putting them together if there are people who work in your own organization, is to think about diversity. This is a key ingredient because without diversity, what you end up with is just a whole bunch of carbon copy of the same thing. So you might be looking for a solution to a problem, and you have 5 teams, and if they're all relatively same background, same cultural background, same gender even, you might end up with a situation, well, you're likely to end up in a situation where you just have solution 1.1, solution 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. So it's just different versions, different carbon copies of the same solution. Now, that's not innovation. That's all that is trying to create some kind of step forward. And that might be all you need, but that's not innovation in my book. What you end up with, if you get a really diverse group of individuals together and you group them into teams in a way that takes advantage of that diversity, then you have solution 1, solution A, solution koala bear, solution hamster wheel. You end up with a crazy variety of different ideas coming to the table because the people in the groups are so diverse and they bring such different perspectives to the challenge. So when we're thinking about diversity, we automatically have to start kind of deconstructing what sort of groups of people do we want to make sure are part of this event, are welcome into this space. So we want to make sure that we have a gender represented across the board. So it's not just a whole bunch of men in the room making decisions about what ideas or what solutions should be coming out of that event, but really making sure there's some sort of gender balance and that there's a spectrum of genders represented. Racial or ethnic diversity can bring a huge advantage to your solutions because without a doubt, people who come from racial or ethnic minority backgrounds have way different perspectives than people who come from majority racial or ethnic backgrounds. So you always want to make sure that you're reaching out to these groups to try to draw them in, welcome them into that space, make sure they feel that they have a safe environment to bring their ideas forward, and make sure that their contributions are being valued. Another area that you could look for in diversity is competence. So what area of, what kind of disciplinary background did they have in university? What sort of job experience do they have? Try to bring out a diversity of elements there. Of course, age would be a really important criteria. Disability would be an important criteria. The ultimate aim here is not to create some kind of broadest scale spectrum of teams, but really just to make sure that diversity is represented as much as possible in those teams and in the group that's participating in that innovation camp. So that's step one. That gets you from just problem solving to innovation. Step two, you have to build trust amongst the members in the room and amongst the members in the team. Now, a huge challenge with diversity is that people do come from very, very different backgrounds and very, very different experiences. So there's a tendency to kind of want to wall yourself off to actually making a contribution to the team in a way that takes advantage of your unique perspectives. And the only way we can ensure that that happens is to make sure that there's a feeling of trust, that there's a sense of trust within the teams and between the teams. And you can do this in a variety of different ways. I mean, we've all heard of things like trust falls, and there are kind of trust activities and trust exercises. So if you're designing an innovation event, always make sure that there's some sort of trust building activities that are at the very beginning of that event. So what a lot of these innovation events kind of fail, a lot of them fail, is that they put the activity itself at the center of it. So it's all about solving that problem, and that's fine, but that's actually a real misstep when it comes to taking advantage of diversity and moving it from the level of now we have diverse teams into problem solving. So there's a really key middle ingredient there, which is build trust. So one, make sure diversity. Two, build trust amongst the teams and amongst the members. And last but not least, and this kind of feels given, but at the same time it's worth pointing out, creativity. Problem solving and innovation especially is not built only on analysis and analytic thinking. It's also built on creative thinking. So if you're trying to design an innovation event, make sure that you have some creativity exercises and activities built into that event. So that way when your teams are working together to solve a challenge or solve a difficult problem, they're already thinking creatively. They're already trying to get out of their normal modes and ways of working. They're already trying to get out of their comfort zones to really attack the problem from a new and different way and using solutions that may not be readily apparent, or you may not be able to actually logic those solutions out. That's where innovation really comes in. It's not being able to solve for A, it's really being able to jump from A to E without going through all the middle steps. So number three is absolutely make sure that creativity is a core component of this activity, exercise, event, whatever you want. So the question might come up, why not critical thinking? We're really trying to solve a problem here, so why don't we look into doing more critical thinking activities or exercises? And sure, there's some advantages to that, and I would totally advocate for including some analytic critical thinking exercises in an event, innovation event. However, I wouldn't lean so hard into that you forget that this also is about creativity. And a lot of people who have come out of university usually have a baseline level of critical thinking skills. Of course, that's hoping that the universities are doing their jobs correctly. But assuming that, what we can't assume necessarily is that people who are engaged in these topics and these interest areas have creativity as a core skill set in their tool belt. So it's really important that we tap into that sense of creativity, that sense of exploration when we're doing one of these events, in order that the outcomes become as rich and diverse as the people who are creating those outcomes. So that's my main guidance here. If you're trying to innovate, if you want to embark on this quest for innovation, main three things here is, number one, create a atmosphere, a place where diversity is valued. Make sure that there are diverse elements in that experience so that people can take advantage of their different perspectives. Number two, make sure that there is trust amongst the individuals and amongst the teams. This is absolutely critical for ensuring the quality of your output. If people don't feel comfortable being able to share a personal experience, being able to share an idea that they think is maybe a little bit strange or a little bit weird, you're not going to get a good output, because those teams are not going to be able to take advantage of the richness that each member brings to the table. They'll end up going for very default, generic, bland solutions that don't really solve the problem. Number three, make sure that creativity is a core component. And the reason why creativity is so important here is because our educational systems, in a lot of respects, are designed to kind of quash creativity. They're designed to kind of repress creativity. We don't get rewarded in educational systems a lot of times for creativity. We get rewarded for our ability to analyze, for our ability to think critically. So make sure that creativity is something that's a core component, and harken back to kindergarten, when everybody was just coloring books and imagining stories and things like that. Those kinds of exercises can really draw out somebody's inner artist, inner storyteller, inner designer. And that's what really can be critical for ensuring that that output of that event hits the mark when it comes to those solutions that you might be looking for.